At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. In the end, what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it this way. My name's General G. Let's begin. Visak began reading Earth's invitation aloud from a datapad, barely holding in his laughter. Let us extend a warm welcome to our fellow Deathworld representatives, and we hope your species will endure Earth's harsh gravity, unpredictable climate, and dangerous wildlife when you finally decide to visit us. He snorted and added, Endure? They think we can't handle their planet. Then continued, Please follow all human safety guidelines when venturing outdoors, which made him wheeze, muttering, My people hunt in acid rain and they're worried I'll trip over a squirrel? Before finishing reading, We look forward to ensuring your survival on our world. At which point he dissolved into open laughter, shaking his head and gasping, Oh, humans, you sweet, murderous little optimists. Visak put down his datapad, the green veins that dominated his face throbbing as consequence of his previous laughter. His black soft skin absorbed the chamber's warm yellow light, making the luminescent veins stand out even more prominently against the darkness of his features. His bright green eyes watered a little from the intensity of his amusement. How ironic that his face, structured much like those very humans inviting them to their world, had just been twisted in mockery of their invite. His attention was suddenly drawn to the avian representative's far less subtle laughter, a burst of loud, uncontrollable vocalizations that quickly became the focus of the four of them, alone around the table at the center of the Deathworld Council chamber. The avian's mirth was a chaotic mix of screeches and chirps, echoing off the high ceiling, his feathered body trembling with the force of it. His talons dug into the cushioned floor as he shifted his weight from one clawed foot to the other. Oh, who cares about Earth and humans? We're all predators here, the avian representative, Orlan, managed to say between his harsh, barking laughs. My people, birds of prey, every last one of us would think Earth is just a vacation. His wings spread with his amusement, the blue feathers exuberant. Arvo, the giant, muscular, brown-skinned Solax who seemed allergic to wearing clothes on his upper body, suddenly slammed a massive fist against the table, the impact reverberating through the chamber. Your voice and laughter are too loud and annoying, Orlan, he growled, his deep voice rumbling like distant thunder. When the loud avian laughter finally stopped, Arvo crossed his arms in front of his broad chest, muscles rippling with the movement. But I agree with what you said about the humans, he added, his voice full of confidence. Warriors like my own people would likely be the apex species on Earth the moment we stepped onto that planet. We would dominate everything. Visak turned to the last member of the council, Alira, a very quiet blue czar with cold skin, and a personality that looked exactly like one would expect of a member of a species who evolved on an ice planet. She rarely spoke unless she had something worth saying. Alira, Visak said, his green veins glowing as he spoke, what's your opinion on Earth's invitation? Alira touched her lips with one long finger, considering the question with her characteristic thoroughness. My species probably wouldn't like the desserts, she said finally, her voice as cold as her homeworld. But anywhere else, we would be the apex species. There was no boast in her words, just a statement of fact, delivered with the absolute certainty of someone who had never encountered an environment that truly challenged her people. Visak felt his own amusement bubble up again as he allowed himself a small chuckle. It's so rare that the four of us agree on something so unanimously, he said, his bright green eyes moving from one council member to another. Maybe this occasion deserves a celebration. The others laughed in their own ways, the avian with his harsh screeches, Arvo with a deep rumbling, and Alira with the faintest exhalation that might have been mistaken for a sigh if one didn't know better. The chamber filled with the sounds of their collective amusement, four apex predators from four different death worlds, all convinced of their superiority over these humans who seemed so charmingly naive about the dangers their world supposedly posed. Suddenly, the door to the meeting room opened, and Zia, the nerdily-looking blue-skinned lead scientist, entered unannounced. Her faint blue skin was covered with white dots that formed constellation-like patterns across her face and arms, and her yellow eyes were magnified behind the corrective lenses she wore. She froze in the doorway, her expression shifting from determined to awkward as she saw all 4 council members staring at her. I'm sorry," she stammered, her hands clutching a datapad to her chest. "I didn't realize you were still in session. I came here to inform you of something important about Earth." She shifted her weight from foot to foot, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. Visak stared at the other 3 ambassadors and noted their surprise. This was highly irregular. Council sessions were not to be interrupted, and Zia knew that better than anyone. Yet something about her urgency made him pause. He gave a slight nod. "Go on, say what you need to say about the human planet." Zia stepped further into the chamber, her fingers gripping her datapad tightly. "I came here to inform you that everything is going according to schedule, and that Earth will be officially classified as a Class 13 Deathworld at tomorrow's ceremony," she said, her voice gaining strength as she moved into familiar territory, the realm of data and analysis. "Class 13, Arvo said immediately, leaning forward in his seat. But the classification stops at 10, the avian added, his head tilted to one side in confusion. Alira said nothing, but her eyes had narrowed to frozen slits. Visak held up a hand, his green veins more pronounced now. "Zia, slow down. The Deathworld classification only goes up to 10. What exactly are you saying?" Zia adjusted her glasses, a nervous habit she had never quite broken. "The Board of Scientists just agreed about re-evaluating the classification system," she explained. "Didn't you receive notification? I was sure everyone got an official pulse comm about it." She looked genuinely confused, as if the idea that someone might not check their communications regularly was foreign to her. The 4 of them exchanged glances, and Visak noticed by the glare in their eyes that they were using their neural implants, the same universal translators that allowed them all to communicate despite their vastly different biology, to access the information Zia had mentioned. Visak did the same, his consciousness barely splitting between the physical chamber and the digital overlay of his implant's interface. There it was, an official communication from the Board of Scientists, time-stamped from 3 days ago. The subject line read, "Earth File, Preliminary Analysis and New Deathworld Classification Guidelines." Visak opened the file and began scanning the contents, his green eyes moving rapidly across the text that appeared in his mind's eye. If what he was seeing could be believed, Earth's violent tectonic activity exceeded Class 10 standards by factors that made Visak's homeworld look geologically stable. The deadly pathogens, viral, bacterial, fungal, and parasitic, formed a rogues gallery of microscopic killers that had evolved, in what the report called, an unusually competitive ecosystem. The gravity reading made him pause, 1.89 times galactic standard. That was punishing. The overabundance of lethal creatures was catalogued in excruciating detail, from megafauna predators to venomous insects so small they could barely be seen. And then there were the humans themselves, persistence hunters with exceptional endurance, high pain tolerance, advanced tool use, and a documented history of more wars than he could bother to read. Visak pulled his consciousness back to the physical chamber, his green veins now glowing in an agitated pattern that betrayed his growing unease. He looked at Zia, then at the other council members, seeing his own shock reflected in their faces. "I'm still not convinced," he said, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "This seems too much." The others nodded, or performed their species equivalent gestures of agreement. Zia sighed, a very human gesture she must have picked up somewhere. "I understand your concerns," she said, her yellow eyes moving from one council member to another. "But the Board of Scientists did a very competent job with the data they obtained on Earth through various means. They even recreated several simulations of the environments of the human's planet at great expense, just to justify this new classification to the whole galaxy." She paused, adjusting her glasses again. "And in the end, not even the scientific teams of the Broad Galactic Council with all the prey species and the Vorsar Federation on the other side of the galaxy disagreed with their claims. So, Earth is indeed the most hostile planet that has evolved sapient life that we've found so far." The council sat in utter silence. The warm yellow light of the chamber suddenly felt oppressive rather than comfortable. Visak could hear his own breathing and even his heartbeat. Finally, Visak broke the silence. "Show us the simulations of the environments." All the members turned to look at Zia, their expressions ranging from skeptical to curious to, in Arvo's case, eager for a challenge. Zia's shoulders slumped a little. "My shift was supposed to end 10 minutes ago," she said weakly, but seeing their expressions, she sighed again. "Fine, follow me." 20 minutes and 2 very awkward elevator rides with all of them squeezed together in a tight space later, Visak found himself following Zia with the other 3 members of the council through corridors that grew progressively colder and more sterile. The research level was a different world from the council chambers, all function, no comfort. The walls were bare metal, marked with identification codes and warning symbols. The lighting had shifted from warm yellow to a harsh clinical white that made everything look sharp-edged and unforgiving. And even the sound of their footsteps seemed to emphasize how alone they were in this section of the facility. Zia led them deeper, past laboratories where Visak could see scientists hunched over equipment, past storage bays filled with equipment he couldn't identify, past doors marked with hazard warnings in a dozen different languages and symbol systems. Finally, she stopped in front of a very large door, easily 3 times the height of Visak himself. It was reinforced, built to contain something dangerous or valuable, or both. "This is the first environment we recreated," Zia explained, consulting her datapad, her breathing forming small clouds in the cold air leaking from the door. "It's based on conditions comparable to 2 places on Earth where humans live, Canada and Russia. They were chosen as the cold baseline because the poles are colder, but even humans don't live there, at least not permanently. Just scientists and researchers in temporary installations." Alira stopped ahead, her movements suddenly sharp, her pale blue skin seeming to drink in the cold of the corridor. "I am not afraid of the cold," she said, her voice hinting an edge of pride that Visak had rarely heard from her. Each word came out frosted with absolute certainty. "My species evolved in an ice world. Frozen water doesn't scare us. It will feel just like home." Zia's expression was carefully neutral, her yellow eyes unreadable behind her glasses. "You're welcome to step inside," she said. "There's a viewing wall where we can all watch you try." They all exchanged a look. Visak caught the flash of uncertainty in the avian's golden eyes, the challenging gleam in Arvo's dark ones, and felt his own curiosity warring with a growing sense of trepidation. The large door opened with a low grinding sound, like continental plates shifting against each other, a deep bass rumble that Visak felt in his bones more than heard. They filed through into a narrow observation corridor. The temperature here was cold but bearable, carefully regulated to protect the observers from what lay beyond. The viewing window stretched before them, offering a clear view into the simulation chamber beyond. It was enormous. The spatial manipulation technology had to be extraordinarily sophisticated to create a space this vast inside the facility. Through the window, Visak could see a landscape of pristine white snow, stretching to a horizon that seemed impossibly distant. The sky was a pale, washed-out blue, and the fake sun that hung in it looked cold and distant, offering light but little warmth. Alira stopped hesitantly in front of the smaller entry door, her hand hovering over the control panel. Her fingers, long and elegant, trembled, or perhaps it was just Visak's imagination. Zia's voice was gentle, almost sympathetic. "You can go in whenever you're ready." Alira hesitated just a moment longer, her blue hand resting on the control panel before pressing the button. The door slid open. A wave of cold rolled out, so intense that even in the observation window, Visak felt it like a slap. His green veins flared bright with the sudden stress, his body instinctively trying to generate more heat. Alira stepped through, and Visak watched her enter an environment of snow and ice. "She looks fine," Visak commented, watching Alira walk confidently into the snowscape, her blue skin seeming perfectly suited to the environment, and her dark hair flowing against the wind. Her posture was straight, her stride confident. She even spread her arms slightly, as if embracing the cold like a long-lost friend. The other members of the council made their equivalent gestures of agreement. "She cannot be fine," Zia said quietly, her yellow eyes fixed on the readout scrolling across a secondary screen embedded in the wall beside the viewing window. The data streams were color-coded, temperature readings in blue, biological readings in green, environmental stress factors in amber, and as Visak watched, more and more of those indicators were sliding into the red zone. This environment's cold would freeze mercury, not just water. Her home planet hardly ever gets colder than minus 20 degrees Celsius, but Earth can go way lower, much lower. This simulation is set to minus 45 degrees Celsius, which is still within the range of inhabited human settlements, places where human children play outside, where humans have built cities and raised families for generations. Visak looked through the window again. Really looked this time, and noticed that Alira was struggling with the cold. The change was subtle at first, a slight hitch in her stride, a barely perceptible slowing of her movements, but as he watched, it became more pronounced. Her arms, which had been spread in welcome, now wrapped around herself in a protective embrace. Her shoulders hunched forward, trying to conserve heat. Her breath, visible in the frigid air as clouds of vapor that crystallized almost instantly, was coming in rapid gasps. Minutes passed. Visak counted them silently, watching as Alira's movements became slower, more labored. Her pale blue skin had taken on a darker shade, almost purple at the extremities, her fingers, her ears, the tip of her nose. Her legs moved like they belonged to someone else, stiff and uncoordinated. She fell once, dropping hard to her knees in the snow. Visak saw her hands sink into the powdered snow, saw the struggle to push herself back up. Why didn't she just give up? Pride? Stubbornness? When they noticed she was about to pass out, her eyes rolling back, her knees buckling again, Arvo actually laughed. "All that pride," he rumbled, his massive chest heaving with his mirth. "And she can't even handle a little cold, though I noticed she at least had the courage to go inside, unlike some." Visak found Arvo's laughter strange, inappropriate, especially based on the fact that Arvo himself had never gone inside. But there was no time to dwell on the hypocrisy, no time to point out that mocking someone for failing a test you were too cowardly to take yourself was the height of foolishness. Without thinking, Visak rushed to the entry door, his green veins blazing bright with sudden adrenaline, slapping the control panel with enough force to leave his handprint glowing on the surface. The door opened, and the cold was so intense that it seemed to bypass his skin entirely, sinking into his muscles, into his bones, turning his blood to slush. But he forced himself forward, running inside without hesitation. He reached Alira just as her knees buckled completely, her body going down into the snow like a puppet with its strings cut. She was cold, terrifyingly cold, her skin like ice against his own chilled flesh. He half-carried, half-dragged her back toward the entry door, which seemed impossibly far away. Alira was in such a bad state that she was dead weight in his arms, her head bouncing with each lurching step, and he found himself talking to her, urging her to hold on, though he couldn't hear his own voice over the shrieking wind. Just when he thought they wouldn't make it, they stumbled through the door. The relative warmth of the observation corridor hit him like a blessing, like divine intervention. Zero was already moving, her earlier awkwardness gone, replaced by competence. She pulled a thermal blanket from an emergency compartment set into the wall, the silvery material unfolding at once. She draped it over Alira, wrapping it tight, tucking it around her shoulders, her legs, creating a cocoon of insulation. "That was a wise decision," Zia said to Visak, her yellow eyes meeting his green ones. There was no judgment in her gaze, no recrimination, just concern and perhaps a hint of respect. She turned to the others, her expression hardening. "Are you already convinced that Earth is a dangerous place?" "Of course not," Arvo said immediately, his voice too loud in the confined space, his massive arms crossing over his broad chest in a gesture of defiance. "This proves nothing, except the Ice Princess overestimated her abilities." The avian nodded in agreement, his head bobbing rapidly, his feathers still slightly fluffed from the residual cold. "One failed test doesn't make Earth a Class 13. It just means she should have stayed home. She should have known her limits." Alira couldn't speak yet, her jaw still clenched against the tremors racking her body, her throat too frozen to form words. Visak himself said nothing, but his mind was working rapidly, reassessing, recalculating. He was starting to see something, starting to understand that perhaps Zia was right. Perhaps they had all been too quick to laugh and dismiss Earth's dangers. Arvo stepped forward, his massive frame somehow seeming even larger in the confined corridor, his shadow falling across the mall. He looked down at Alira with contempt, then turned to Zia. "Show me a normal place," he demanded. "Not this simulation of Canada and Russia frozen wastelands. Show me something that isn't designed to kill ice-worlders, and I'll prove that Earth is not that much of a challenge." Zia adjusted her glasses, and Visak caught a glimpse of something in her expression, perhaps resignation, or maybe the weary patience of someone whose shift was over and just wanted to go home. "Of course," she said simply, her voice flat. They moved again, Alira staying close to Visak this time, the thermal blanket still wrapped around her shoulders like a cloak of shame. They entered another section of the facility, this one marked with warning symbols in multiple languages and pictographic systems. Zia led them past all of these to another large door, this one emanating heat that Visak could feel even from several meters away. "This is an environment based on the African biome," Zia explained, pulling up data on her datapad, her fingers scrolling through screens of information. "The temperatures are very hot here, to the point of being intolerable for many species. We're talking about sustained temperatures above 45 degrees Celsius, which is where many proteins begin to denature. The gravity itself is also adjusted to Earth standard, 1.8 times what you're used to. Remember, humans don't just visit these conditions, they live in them. They work in them. They raise families in them." She paused, scrolling through her notes. "We have a little robot to simulate a lion, one of Earth's apex predators. By human suggestion, we called it Simba." "This will be easy," Arvo declared, striding toward the entry door without hesitation, his massive legs carrying him forward with ground-eating strides. "My people have faced worse. We train in environments that would kill lesser species. A little heat and heavy gravity? Child's play. I'll show you what a real Deathworlder looks like." They all gathered close to the viewing window, pressing forward to get a clear view. Arvo paused at the entry door just long enough to flash them a confident grin, all teeth and bravado, before slapping the control panel violently. The door slid open, and even from the observation corridor, Visak could feel the wave of heat that rolled out, see the way the air distorted and wavered with thermal intensity. Arvo stepped through, and the simulation beyond was startlingly realistic. A vast savanna stretching to a too-distant horizon. The grass, golden and dry, ready to ignite at the slightest spark. "Easy," Arvo said, his voice coming through the observation corridor's audio system, distorted by the speakers but still full of confidence. He laughed again, taking another step into the simulated African environment, his bare chest gleaming with the beginnings of sweat. "See? Not even breaking a stride." But Visak could see that the gravity was not being pleasant to him. Arvo's movements, usually so fluid and powerful, had become heavy. Each step seemed to require more effort than it should, as if he were walking through water or mud or something that grabbed at his feet and refused to let go. Arvo tried to pretend that everything was fine as he walked deeper into the simulation, his shoulders back, his head up, the very picture of confidence. He was perhaps 20 meters from the entry door, not far, barely any distance at all under normal circumstances, when something appeared in the low vegetation. The grass rustled, the movement subtle at first, hardly noticeable against the constant swaying caused by the wind. But then Visak saw it, a tawny shape, low and sleek, and it was moving fast. The lion robot emerged from the grass in a blur, its mechanical muscles driving it forward. It was a perfect replica, engineered with excruciating attention to detail. From the tail to the calculating amber eyes, its coat was the exact color of dried grass, providing camouflage in this environment. The lion didn't roar, didn't give any warning, just as a real predator wouldn't. It simply attacked. Arvo tried to turn, his warrior instinct screaming at him that he was in danger. His body began the motion, but the gravity that had been merely uncomfortable became his enemy in that crucial moment. The lion robot hit him like a missile, like a falling boulder, like the fist of an angry god. The impact drove the air from Arvo's lungs, and suddenly he was going down, hard. His back hit the sun-baked earth, and then Arvo was pinned, flat on his back, the lion robot standing on his chest, its weight calibrated to match that of a real lion, pressing down on him like judgment. Its jaws hovered over his throat, close enough that Arvo would be able to see every detail of the teeth that could end him if this was a real animal. "Zia!" Arvo called out, and Visak heard genuine fear in his voice for the first time since he'd known the warrior. "Zia, help! Get this thing off me! Now!" "You're not at risk," Zia said calmly, though Visak noticed her fingers were already moving over her datapad's controls, pulling up system interfaces, checking status indicators. "The biting option is turned off. It's just holding you down, just demonstrating what would happen if this were real." The avian was laughing, his harsh screeches filling the observation corridor with sound that was almost painful in its intensity. "If only you could fly!" he managed between his cackling, his wings spreading with his mirth. "Nothing like this would have happened, but no, you had to walk around like prey, like something waiting to be hunted, the great warrior brought down by a robot." Visak felt worry settling into his chest like a cold stone, heavy and undeniable. Earth might indeed be worth the title of a Class 13 Deathworld. He watched as Zia interacted with the interface, disengaging the gravity simulation with a command that made Arvo suddenly feel lighter. The lion released Arvo and backed away, releasing the frightened warrior. Arvo stood up and returned in silence, his earlier bravado completely evaporated like water on hot stone. He was a mess, his brown skin dirty, his hair plastered to his skull. He stopped beside Alira, and they both exchanged a look, a moment of shared understanding that needed no words. Their eyes met, and in that moment they were united by something stronger than pride, the absolute certainty that they never wanted to go to that place again. That Earth was not a vacation, not a challenge to be overcome, but a world that would kill them without malice, without hesitation, simply because they were soft, and it was not. "Is this enough?" Zia asked, her voice gentle but firm, like a teacher dealing with students who refuse to learn. "Do you understand now?" The avian ruffled his feathers, a gesture Visak had learned to recognize as nervousness disguised as indignation. His head tilted back and forth, his golden eyes darting between his fellow council members. "Unless they have flying predators the size of that lion," he said, his voice lacking its earlier confidence but still somewhat firm, "I would still be the only one of you able to survive Earth just fine. I can fly. I can escape any ground-based threat. The humans should fear me, not the other way around." Zia said nothing. She simply reached into a nearby compartment and pulled out a hand scanner, a small device used for rapid biological analysis. Without asking for permission, without warning, she stepped forward and reached out with her free hand, grasping one of the avian's primary flight feathers with quick fingers, and plucked it free with a sharp yank. "Hey!" the avian squawked, his voice rising to an almost painful pitch, his wings flapping in agitation. "That hurt! You can't just... That's assault! That's..." But Zia was already analyzing the feather, sliding it into the scanner's input slot. The scanner was quick, analyzing the cellular composition, running it against databases of known pathogens and environmental stressors. After a moment that felt far longer than it actually was, she turned the screen with the results toward the avian, and then toward everyone else. Visak leaned in to look, his green eyes scanning the data that scrolled across the display. The readout was damning. Immune system compatibility, 12%. Pathogen resistance, critical failure across 71 categories. Projected survival time in standard Earth environment, 8 to 12 minutes before systemic infection. Recommended prophylactic treatment, full-spectrum nanofluid infusion, repeated every 6 hours. Atmospheric density compensation, insufficient wing surface area for sustained flight at 1.89 Gs. Flight capability rating, grounded. "With your immune system," Zia explained, her voice taking on the patient tone of a teacher instructing a particularly stubborn student who refused to accept reality, "you would only last perhaps 10 minutes on Earth before getting sick and needing nanofluid treatment. Your biology is simply not equipped to handle the pathogenic load of Earth's environment." She paused, adjusting her glasses with her free hand, the feather still held in the other like evidence at a trial. "Also, your wingspan and Earth's atmospheric density and gravity would mean you wouldn't even be able to fly. Earth's atmosphere is much denser than your homeworld's, yes, but the gravity more than compensates for that advantage. The energy required to maintain flight in 1.89 times standard gravity would exceed your muscle capacity. You'd be grounded, just like them. But you could try for yourself if you wanted. The avian stared at the environment visible through the window, at the golden savanna where the lion robot now sat motionless, a statue of death waiting to be reactivated. Then he looked at the feather in Zia's hands, at the physical evidence of his own vulnerability. His head tilted first one way, then the other, processing, recalculating, reassessing everything he thought he knew about his place in the galaxy's hierarchy. Finally he spoke. "Perhaps Earth is a Class 13 death world after all." Visak found himself disappointed that the avian ambassador had more brains than he'd given him credit for. It would have been amusing to watch him fail as spectacularly as Alira and Arvo had, to see that cocky confidence shattered by reality. But perhaps this was better. Perhaps they had all learned enough. Perhaps seeing the danger was sufficient without needing to experience it personally. "Zia," Visak said, his green veins glowing bright, "what's your opinion about the invitation? What is your opinion as such a competent scientist about what the Council should do regarding Earth?" Zia smiled, and for a moment all the awkwardness of someone who spent more time in a lab than interacting with other sapients evaporated like morning dew under that brutal African sun they'd just witnessed. "You should accept the invitation and visit Earth," she said without hesitation, her voice ringing with absolute confidence. "Respect the planet, which means following the instructions of the humans and the recommendations of the medical team. They're not trying to insult you. They're trying to keep you alive." She pulled up an image on her datapad and turned it so they could all see. It showed Zia and several other scientists of her species inside what looked like a warm home on Earth, surrounded by humans. The humans were smiling, their faces open and friendly, and the scientists looked comfortable, even happy. There was food on a table, drinks being shared, laughter captured in a frozen moment. "We've only begun to understand how dangerous humans and Earth are," Zia continued, her voice soft. "But most of you know nothing at all about how friendly and welcoming humans can be. You would regret it in the future if you didn't visit Earth at least once. They're remarkable, really. They live on a world that would kill most of us within hours, but they treat it like home, like it's normal. And when they invite you to share that home with them, they genuinely want you to survive and enjoy the experience. They'll go to extraordinary lengths to keep you safe, to show you the beauty alongside the danger. They're predators, yes, but they're also capable of incredible kindness." Visak and the others stayed in silence as those words sank in, as the weight of their own ignorance settled on their shoulders like a physical burden. The observation corridor suddenly felt very quiet, very small. Zia checked the time on her datapad and winced. "My shift ended long ago," she said, already moving toward the exit with quick steps. "My human friends are waiting for me for an online meeting. We're discussing a collaborative research project on comparative Deathworld ecology." She paused at the door, looking back at them one last time, her yellow eyes moving from one council member to another. "Think about what I said. Earth is dangerous, yes, but the danger is worth facing, because on the other side of that danger is something extraordinary." Then she left them there, alone with their thoughts and their newly humbled understanding of their place in the galaxy. Alira was still wrapped in the thermal blanket, her expression distant, her eyes staring at nothing as she processed what she'd experienced. Arvo was uncharacteristically quiet, his massive arms hanging at his sides, all the warrior's pride drained out of him like blood from a wound. The avian had tucked his head under one wing, a gesture of deep contemplation or perhaps shame. Visak realized they had all been wrong about laughing at Earth's invitation. The humans hadn't been naive or overly cautious. They had been trying to save them from their own arrogance, trying to prevent exactly what had just happened. And they'd been dismissed as weak, as overcautious, as amusing in their concern. The memory of his own laughter felt like acid now, burning in his throat. He looked at each of his fellow council members in turn, seeing his own realization reflected in their faces, in their postures, in the defeated set of their shoulders. "So, about Earth," Visak said quietly, his green veins bright with a strange mixture of apprehension and curiosity. "When should we schedule a visit?"